My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 38 years old, and I am about to tell you the story of how I discovered that my entire life was a carefully constructed lie, and how I decided to serve the truth, cold and sharp, on Thanksgiving Day. For 38 years, I believed I was Eleanor Harrington. I was the daughter of Arthur and Margaret Harrington, residents of a pristine white colonial house on Maple Street in Greenwich, Connecticut. To the outside world, we were the picture of old money perfection. My father was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. My mother was the chairwoman of the local historical society. I had a brother, Charles, who was 2 years older, and we wanted for nothing. I remember the smell of the house, lemon polish, fresh flowers, and the faint scent of my father's leather-bound law books. It was a place of order. My father was a man of logic, of evidence, of black and white. He taught me to read by the age of 4. He taught me that if you couldn't prove something with facts, it wasn't worth believing. My mother was the warmth, or at least she tried to be. She was a planner. Every meal was scheduled, every vacation was mapped out 3 years in advance. She was meticulous. Looking back, I realized she wasn't just organized, she was controlling. She was managing a narrative. My relationship with my parents was complicated. I was the surprise, the late-in-life baby. My brother Charles was the golden child. He looked like my father, tall, dark-haired, with that sharp jawline. I, on the other hand, looked like my mother's side of the family, or so they told me. I had red hair, unlike anyone else in the Harrington lineage. I had freckles. I had a wild, creative streak that my father viewed as an inconvenient personality flaw. "Eleanor, stop daydreaming," he would say over breakfast, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. "Reality is where we live." I tried to fit into the mold. I got good grades, I went to the right schools, I dated the sons of their country club friends, but there was always a sense that I was an actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for. A sense of displacement. The first crack in the foundation appeared when I was 16. I was doing a genealogy project for history class. It was a simple assignment: map out your family tree. I was excited. I loved history, and I loved the idea of discovering where I came from. I sat at the kitchen table, spreading out papers. I asked my father for the names of his grandparents. He hesitated. It was a split second, but for a man who always had an answer, a split-second hesitation was a universe of silence. "Harold and Beatrice Harrington," he said, finally. "But don't go digging too deep. Our family history is private." I thought it was just his typical obsession with privacy, but later that week, I asked my mother for her side. I wanted to know about her family's history in Ireland. I asked for a photo of her parents on their wedding day. She turned pale. I remember it vividly. She was standing by the sink, and her hands, which were usually so steady arranging flowers, started to tremble slightly. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. "We don't have those old photos. They were lost in a fire before you were born." "A fire?" I asked. "I've never heard about a fire." "It was before your time," she said, turning her back to me. "It was a sad time. We don't talk about it." I let it go. I was 16, and I was more interested in boys and prom than in dead ancestors. But that hesitation, that pale face, that phantom fire, they lodged themselves somewhere deep in my subconscious, a splinter I couldn't quite find, but one I knew was there, festering. Years passed. I went to college, studied literature, and became a librarian. It was a safe, quiet job that allowed me to live in my daydreams, as my father called them. I married a kind man named David. He was a high school history teacher. He was patient and steady, the opposite of my father. When I had my first daughter, Lily, I felt a shift. Looking at her, I wanted to know where she came from. I wanted to know the lineage, the genetic stories, the history I was passing on. The splinter started to itch again. During a visit home when Lily was 2 years old, Ed brought it up again. We were having dinner. My father was carving the roast. My mother was refilling wine glasses. "Mom," I said, trying to sound casual, "I'd really love to get some family medical history for the girls. Do you have any records of our family? You know, grandparents, great-grandparents? I want to know if there's a history of anything I should watch for." The clatter of the carving knife against the silver platter was deafening. My father froze, the knife suspended in midair. My mother's hand jerked, splashing red wine onto the white tablecloth. "For heaven's sake, Eleanor," my father snapped, slamming the knife down, "why must you always pick at things? There is no history. We are a healthy family. Let it rest." "I just want to know," I started. "No," he said, his voice final. "This is nonsense. You are a Harrington. That is all you need to know." I looked at my mother for support. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at the wine stain spreading across the linen, as if it were a pool of blood. My brother Charles, sitting across from me, just shook his head. "Why do you always have to make everything so dramatic, Elle? Leave them alone." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. A question formed in my mind, small at first, but growing with terrifying speed. What are they so afraid of me finding? It took me 2 more years to gather the courage to find the answer. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that my parents were just private people, but the splinter had become a thorn, and it was digging deeper. I decided to do something my father would have hated. I used technology. I bought a DNA testing kit. It felt like an act of rebellion. I swabbed my cheek, sealed the tube, and sent it off into the void. For 6 weeks, I waited. I didn't tell David. I didn't tell anyone. Every night after the girls were asleep, I would check my email, my heart pounding. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I got the notification. "Your results are ready." I was at the library, sitting in the back office. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I logged in. I looked at the ethnicity estimates first. It was interesting. It showed a mix of Irish, English, and something I didn't expect, a significant portion of Southern European, Italian specifically. That was odd. My father's family was supposedly pure English stock. My mother's family was Irish. Where did the Italian come from? I scrolled down, my curiosity now fully ignited, and then I saw the section DNA Matches. A list of names popped up: cousins, second cousins, people I might be related to. The first few names were people I didn't recognize. I scrolled further, looking for a Harrington, for a name I knew. And then I saw it, a match labeled close family, possible first cousin or half-sibling. The name was Matteo Rossi. I stared at the name. It meant nothing to me. I clicked on his profile. He had a public family tree attached. I clicked on it, my mind racing. I saw his father's name, Enzo Rossi. I saw his mother's name, Margaret Rossi. My blood ran cold. My mother's name was Margaret Harrington, but here in this stranger's family tree was a Margaret Rossi. I looked at the dates. The birth date matched my mother's. The location matched, but the last name was wrong. I clicked on the profile for Enzo Rossi. I saw his picture. It was a grainy, old-looking photo, but I could see the man clearly. He had dark hair, olive skin, and a kind face. And he had a smile that I recognized because I saw it in the mirror every day. My smile. My heart was slamming against my ribs. The room felt like it was spinning. I sat there for what felt like an hour, just staring at the screen. I looked back at my own profile. The name next to father's side was still listed as unknown, but the DNA didn't lie. The connection to Matteo Rossi, my half-nephew, was there. It was a biological fact. My father, Arthur Harrington, was not my biological father. The man who raised me, who taught me logic and reason, who demanded I live in reality, had spent 38 years building a reality that was a lie. And my mother, the meticulous planner, had erased an entire life, a man named Enzo Rossi. I closed the laptop. I walked out of the library and got into my car. I didn't go home. I just drove. I drove for an hour, my mind a blank, terrifying void. I pulled over on a side road and I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw. All the pieces started to click into place. The hesitation, the missing photos, the fire, my father's fury whenever I asked about the past, my brother's dismissal. It wasn't just privacy, it was a cover-up. They had stolen my history. They had erased my father. I thought about my father, Arthur, the cold, distant man who always looked at me with a faint disappointment I could never understand. Now I knew why. I wasn't his. I was a reminder, a living, breathing piece of evidence of my mother's past. And my mother, the woman who tucked me in at night, who made me costumes for school plays, who taught me how to bake cookies, she had lied to me every single day of my life. She had looked into my face, seen the features of the man she'd left, and said nothing. For the next few weeks, I was a ghost. I went through the motions at home, but David knew something was wrong. I finally told him. I showed him the DNA results. He held me while I cried, the first tears I had let fall since I saw the name Matteo Rossi. "You have to talk to them," he said, gently. "I can't," I said. "I'm not ready. I need to know who he was first." The next part was the hardest. I had a name, Enzo Rossi. I had a location, the same small town in Rhode Island where my mother grew up. I started researching. I found old yearbooks. I found a small local newspaper archive online. I spent weeks, hour after hour, digging. I found a photo of my mother, Margaret O'Sullivan, as she was then. She was standing next to a young man with dark hair and a brilliant smile. The caption read, "Margaret O'Sullivan and Enzo Rossi at the St. Anthony's Festival, 1980. They were in love. I could see it in the way she leaned into him, in the way he looked at her like she was the sun. I continued searching. I found an article from a small local paper dated 1982. The headline made my stomach drop. "Local woman's disappearance ends in scandal." The article was short. It detailed how Margaret O'Sullivan, the daughter of a prominent Irish Catholic family, had vanished from town with Enzo Rossi, the son of Italian immigrants. Her family had reported her missing. When she returned, a month later, she was alone, and she was engaged to Arthur Harrington, a young, ambitious law student from a good family. I found another article, a tiny blurb from a few months later. It was a wedding announcement. Margaret O'Sullivan to Arthur Harrington. It mentioned that the ceremony was small due to recent family difficulties. It was as if Enzo Rossi had been erased. He was the family difficulty. He was the scandal. He was the dirty secret that had to be scrubbed clean so Margaret could step into the life her family wanted for her. I eventually found an obituary. Enzo Rossi. Died in 1985. He was only 27 years old. The cause of death was listed as a car accident. He died just 3 years after my mother left him. He died just a few months before I was born. I stared at the date. I did the math. If I was born in 1985, just months after his death, she had been pregnant with me when she left him. She was pregnant with me when she married Arthur Harrington. The truth was worse than I ever imagined. It wasn't just that she left him for a wealthier man. It was that she took me, his child, and gave me to another man. She let me call another man Daddy. She let Arthur Harrington raise the son of Enzo Rossi, likely as a way to bury the shame, to complete the illusion of a perfect life. I sat in my home office, surrounded by printouts of articles and old photos. I looked at the photo of Enzo Rossi, my real father, smiling at the festival. He had died young, poor, and forgotten. His name was scrubbed from his own child's history. And then I looked at the invitation to Thanksgiving that my mother had sent. It was engraved on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It was perfect. It was a summons to the Palace of Lies for the annual Feast of Gratitude. A cold, clear thought entered my mind. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was something else entirely. It was resolve. If they wanted to erase Enzo Rossi, I was going to bring him back. I was going to bring him to their table. They gave her an ultimatum. Come home and marry Arthur Harrington, the son of a business associate, a man who would give her the life she was supposed to have, or lose her family forever. She left. She broke Enzo's heart. She went back to Greenwich, married Arthur, and never looked back. Enzo tried to fight for her, for the baby, but he had no money, no power. The Harringtons had lawyers. They threatened him with a restraining order, with a lawsuit, with ruining his family's small business. He was crushed. A few months later, he was driving home one night, heartbroken and likely distracted, and he wrapped his car around a tree. He died instantly. He never stopped loving her, Marco said. He never stopped loving you. His last words were your name, Eleanor. I hung up the phone, and I knew what I had to do. I called Marco back the next day. Uncle Marco, I said, I want you to come to my house for Thanksgiving. He was quiet for a moment. You think that's a good idea? No, I said. I think it's the only idea. I explained my plan. I wasn't going to tell my parents. I wasn't going to give them a chance to prepare, to spin the story, to gaslight me. I was going to bring the truth to them, wrapped in the guise of a family holiday. Marco agreed. He said he had waited 40 years to look Margaret Harrington in the eye. He wasn't going to miss it. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. I invited my parents, as usual. They accepted, as usual. I told them David was making the turkey. I told them to come hungry. I was calm. I was pleasant. I was the perfect daughter. I had 6 weeks until Thanksgiving, 6 weeks to find the living legacy of Enzo Rossi. My first step was to contact my DNA match, Matteo Rossi. I composed an email a dozen times before I finally sent it. I introduced myself, I explained who I was, I asked if he knew who his grandfather Enzo was, and if he had any surviving family. The reply came 3 days later. It was from a woman named Sofia Rossi, Matteo's mother and Enzo's daughter-in-law. She was kind, she was cautious, but she was also curious. It turned out that Enzo had a brother, a younger brother named Marco. Marco was still alive. He was 73 years old. He lived in the same town in Rhode Island where the whole story began. He was a retired carpenter, and, according to Sophia, he had spent the last 40 years wondering what happened to his brother's child. I called Marco that evening. His voice was rough, thick with an accent he had never lost. "Hello? Mr. Rossi?" I said, my voice trembling. "My name is Eleanor. I think I'm your niece." There was a long silence. I heard him exhale, a shaky, rattling breath. "Margaret's girl?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. "I knew you'd come," he said. "I always knew. Enzo, he talked about you. Before he died, he talked about the baby. He never got to see you. They wouldn't let him." I broke down. I sat on the floor of my office, phone pressed to my ear, and I sobbed while this old man, my uncle, told me about my father. He told me that Enzo and Margaret were madly in love. They were young, they were poor, but they were happy. When Margaret's family found out she was pregnant, they were furious. They threatened to disown her. They called Enzo a wop and a nobody. My brother Charles and his wife Pamela arrived next. More air kisses, more small talk. Charles looked at me with his usual condescending smirk. "You didn't burn the turkey this year, did you, Elle?" I smiled. "Not this year, Charles." The clock was ticking. I was waiting for the final guest. At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang again. I looked at David. He gave me a slight nod. I walked to the door, my heart beating a steady, slow rhythm. I opened it. There stood Marco Rossi. He was dressed in a simple black suit, a little worn but clean. He held a bottle of homemade wine in one hand and a small bouquet of flowers in the other. He looked nervous, but his jaw was set. "Uncle Marco," I said, loud enough for the people in the living room to hear. "I'm so glad you made it." I took his arm and led him inside. As we entered the living room, the chatter died. I saw my mother first. She was holding her wine glass. Her face went from pale to ashen in the span of a second. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. My father saw him next. Arthur Harrington, the man who had built his life on a lie, stood up from his chair. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he thundered. Charles just stared, confused. "Who is this?" I held Marco's arm and looked at my mother. Her eyes were wide with terror. She was looking at Marco like she was seeing a ghost. In a way, she was. He was the spitting image of his brother. "Everyone," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I'd like you to meet Marco Rossi. He's my uncle, my father's brother." I went to Rhode Island to meet Marco in person. When I saw him standing at the door of his small, cluttered house, I saw my father. He had the same smile, the same dark eyes. He hugged me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was hugging someone who shared my blood, not just my address. We spent the afternoon together. He showed me photos. He told me stories. He gave me a small, worn rosary that had belonged to my father. I held it in my palm and felt a connection I had been denied for 38 years. "Are you ready?" I asked him as I was leaving. He looked at me, and his eyes were hard. "I've been ready since the day they buried my brother," he said. Chapter 4. The Feast of Lies. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and bright. The house smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon. The girls were excited. David was nervous. He knew what was coming, and he had agreed to have the kids eat early and go to a neighbor's house for dessert. He was my rock, but even he was pale. At 1 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to my parents. My mother was in a wool coat and pearls. My father was in a blazer, looking as stern and proper as ever. They carried a bottle of expensive wine and a pie from a fancy bakery. "Darling," my mother said, kissing my cheek, "Happy Thanksgiving." "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, smiling. I looked at my father. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad." He nodded, handing me the wine. "Smells good," he said, his voice clipped. I led them into the living room. David poured them drinks. We made small talk. My mother talked about the Historical Society's Christmas gala. My father complained about the stock market. It was so predictable, so scripted. The silence was suffocating. My father's face was turning purple. "Get this man out of my sight," he hissed at me. "No," I said. "I don't think I will." I turned to my mother. "Isn't that right, Mom? Isn't Marco my uncle? Isn't his brother Enzo my real father?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a trapped animal. "I took a DNA test," I continued, looking around the room. "I found out the truth you've been hiding from me for 38 years. The truth you buried when you left him, pregnant with his child, to marry a man with money." Charles finally caught up. "Eleanor, what are you talking about? This is insane." I pulled the photos from my pocket, the yearbook photos, the newspaper clippings. I tossed them on the coffee table. "Read them," I said to Charles. "See for yourself. Your perfect parents, your perfect family. It's all a lie." My father stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are an ungrateful, wicked girl. I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By dragging some stranger into my family's home? Your family's home? I laughed, and it was a bitter, hollow sound. This is my home, and he is not a stranger. He is the only family here who actually shares my blood. I turned to my mother, who was now crying silently, tears streaming down her face. I want to hear it from you, Mom. I want to hear you say it. I want you to tell me why you erased my father, why you let him die alone without ever seeing his daughter. She was shaking. She looked at Arthur for support, but he was too enraged to help her. She looked at Charles, who was reading the articles, his face growing pale. Finally, in a small, broken voice, she spoke. I was young. I was scared. My parents, they said if I stayed with him, they would cut me off. They would never speak to me again. Arthur offered me a life, a good life. I thought I was doing the right thing.
For who? I screamed. For you? You didn't do it for me. You took me from a man who loved me and gave me to a man who looked at me with resentment every single day of my life because I was a reminder of your shame. Arthur lunged forward. David stepped between us. Get out, David said to Arthur, his voice low and dangerous. Get out of our house. This isn't over, Arthur snarled, looking at me with pure hatred. It is over, I said. For you it is. You're not my father. You never were. You were just a man who agreed to a lie. And now the truth is sitting at my table. I looked at Marco. He was staring at my mother. He hadn't said a word. Margaret, Marco said, his voice soft but cutting, you ruined my brother. You broke his heart, and then you took his child and gave her your last name. I hope the money was worth it. My mother collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. Charles was shouting at me, calling me a monster for doing this on Thanksgiving. Pamela was trying to usher him out. Arthur grabbed my mother's arm, yanking her to her feet. We're leaving. Good, I said. I never want to see either of you again. You are dead to me. They left. They walked out of my house, slamming the door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. I turned to Marco. He was crying. I took his hand. Let's have Thanksgiving, I said, my voice trembling.
The days after Thanksgiving were a war. My father, Arthur, tried to sue me for defamation. He sent a cease and desist letter demanding I remove any mention of false claims about my parentage from social media. I didn't post anything. I didn't have to. He was the one who had exposed himself by reacting with violence. My mother called me 17 times in the first 2 days. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, her voice trembling, alternating between apologies and pleas, and eventually anger. How could you do this to me, Eleanor? I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. Doesn't that count for anything? It counted for something. It counted for a lifetime of lies. It counted for the fact that she let me grow up feeling like an outsider in my own home because she was too much of a coward to tell the truth. My brother, Charles, the golden child, led the charge against me and the family. He sent me a long, scathing email telling me I had destroyed the family, that I was selfish, that I should have let the past stay in the past. You have no idea what you've done, he wrote. You've ruined Mom. You've ruined Dad's reputation. You've made us all look like fools. I wrote back one line. You look like fools because you are fools. You chose a lie over the truth. The ripple effects were wider than I expected. Arthur Harrington's partners at the law firm got wind of the scandal. A senior partner involved in a decades-old cover-up of a child's parentage? It didn't look good. They asked him to take an early retirement. He was humiliated. My mother was uninvited from the Historical Society gala. The women who had sipped tea with her for years suddenly found other plans. She was shunned.
The very world she had sacrificed her true love to join, the world of country clubs and social status, cast her out. The irony was so sharp it was almost beautiful. But through all of it, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would, at least not at first. I felt grief. I was grieving a father I never knew, a childhood that was a lie, and a mother who was a stranger. And then I started to heal.
Marco became a constant presence in my life. He came to my daughter's school plays, he taught them how to make pasta from scratch, he told them stories about their great-uncle Enzo, a man who could fix anything and who laughed with his whole body. He was the grandfather my girls had been missing. He was the father I had been missing. One evening, about a month after Thanksgiving, Marco came over for dinner. He brought a box. It was old, taped shut, the cardboard soft with age. "I found this in Enzo's things," he said, pushing it across the table. I was waiting for the right time. I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my mother, Margaret O'Sullivan. They were unopened. Enzo had written them, but she never received them. Marco had found them in his brother's apartment after he died. I opened the first one. It was dated a week after she left. "My dearest Margaret, I don't understand. I know your parents are angry, but we can work through this. I love you. I love our baby. Please come back. We can figure it out. I'll do anything." I read them all that night. They were a chronicle of a man's slow descent into despair. They started with hope, then turned to confusion, then to heartbreak, and finally to a quiet, resigned love. The last letter was dated just a few days before the accident. "Margaret, I saw a woman with red hair today. It made me think of you. I wonder if the baby has red hair. I hope she has your smile. I will love you both forever, no matter what. If you're happy, that's all that matters. Tell our daughter about me someday. Tell her her father loved her." I held the letters to my chest and cried for the man I never knew, for the love that was stolen, and for the truth that finally, after 38 years, had a voice.
6 months later, I got a call from my mother. She was alone. Arthur had moved out. He was staying at a hotel, and the divorce papers were being drafted. The Harrington empire, built on sand, had crumbled. "Eleanor," she said, her voice frail, "I need to see you." I hesitated. Marco was sitting on my couch, reading a book to my youngest daughter. I looked at him, and he nodded. "Okay," I said. "Tomorrow. Here. But Marco will be here." She agreed. She arrived the next day, looking like a ghost of the woman she used to be. Her hair was unkempt. She wasn't wearing makeup. She had lost weight. She looked old. She sat across from me at the kitchen table. Marco sat in the living room, within earshot, but giving us space. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "I was a coward," she finally said. "I was young, and I was a coward." "You were young for a few years," I said. "You were a coward for 38. She flinched, but she nodded. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought a life with Arthur, with money, with stability was better than a life with a carpenter. I thought I was giving you a better future." "You were giving me a lie," I said. "You were giving me a man who resented me because I looked like the man you left. You gave me a brother who was raised to think I was lesser. You gave me a childhood where I always felt like I didn't belong." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Tell me about him," I said. "Tell me about Enzo, the truth." And she did. For 2 hours, she told me about the boys she fell in love with. She told me about his laugh, his kindness, his dreams of opening his own carpentry shop. She told me about the pressure from her family, the threats, the ultimatum. She told me about the night she left him, how he stood on her parents' porch begging her not to go, and how her father called the police. She cried.
I cried. Marco, listening from the other room, cried.
When she was done, I took a deep breath. I forgive you, I said. Not for me, for you. Because holding on to this anger is hurting me more than it hurts you. But I will never forget, and I will never allow you to pretend it didn't happen. My daughters know the truth. They know about Enzo. They call Marco Grandpa. If you want to be in our lives, you have to accept that. You have to accept that the man you tried to erase is now part of our family. She looked at Marco, who had walked to the kitchen doorway. She looked at him with a mixture of shame and sorrow. I'm sorry, Marco, she said. I'm sorry for what I did to your brother. Marco looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, he loved you until the day he died. He never stopped. I don't have to forgive you for him. That's between you and God. But for Eleanor's sake, I will be civil. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was a beginning. A year later, I stood in a small cemetery in Rhode Island. It was a cold, bright day, much like that Thanksgiving. I was with Marco, my daughters, and David. We were standing in front of a grave. The headstone was old, but it had been cleaned. The name was carved clearly. Enzo Rossi, beloved son, brother, and father. Marco had arranged to have the words "and father" added. It was a small change, but it was everything. I knelt down and placed the rosary Marco had given me on the stone. I also placed a small framed photo of me and my girls. Hi, Dad, I said, my voice catching. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you, but I'm here now. I'm here, and I brought your granddaughters. They know about you. They know you loved me. Lily, my oldest, knelt beside me. Is this my real grandpa? She whispered. Yes, I said. This is your grandpa Enzo. She placed a small flower on the grave.
I looked at Marco, who was wiping his eyes. I looked at my daughters, who were the legacy of a love that was destroyed by greed and fear. I thought about the letters, the love story that ended in tragedy, and the truth that had finally been unearthed. I didn't bring Enzo to Thanksgiving that day. I brought his memory. I brought his brother. I brought the truth. And in doing so, I set us all free. If there is one thing I have learned from all of this, it is that secrets are a cancer. They eat away at the foundation of a family until there is nothing left but a hollow shell of appearances. My mother spent 38 years trying to build a perfect life on a foundation of lies. She had the money, the status, the husband with the pedigree, but she didn't have peace. She spent every day of those 38 years looking over her shoulder, terrified that the past would catch up with her. And when it finally did, it didn't just catch up, it destroyed everything she had tried to build. To anyone watching this, if you are carrying a secret that affects the people you love, please understand this. The truth has a way of coming out. It may take decades, but it will come, and the longer you wait, the more damage it will do. I could have spent the rest of my life wondering why I felt like an outsider. I could have continued to let my father's coldness chip away at my self-worth. I could have let my mother's lies define me, but I chose the truth. And even though the truth was painful, it was also liberating. I found my family. Not the one I was born into, but the one that was always meant to be mine. I found a man who loved me before I was even born. I found an uncle who waited 40 years to meet his niece. I found a history, a culture, a legacy that was stolen from me. My name is Eleanor Vance, but in my heart, I will always be Eleanor Rossi. I am the daughter of Enzo Rossi, a man who loved fiercely, who lost everything, and who left behind a legacy of truth that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The moral? You can build a house of cards, but you cannot live in it. Sooner or later, the wind will blow, and when it does, the only thing that will protect you is the truth.